Hello, everyone. Happy Solemnity of St. George. Today, the people of Odessa celebrate the solemnity of their patron saint. Throughout the world, we celebrate St. George as an optional memorial. But for us in Odessa, this is indeed a solemn occasion. And so I wish you, as your pastor, a very happy solemnity of St. George. You know, in the past, when I was at other parishes, before I even had an idea that I would come to a parish named St. George, we'd come to this day and I'd say, well, all we pretty much know about St. George is that he slayed the dragon. And let's be honest, that probably didn't happen. And then we moved on. There's very little we know about St. George. There's a mystery around his life. Like many other saints, we have taken the life of St. George and we have sort of used it as a catechetical tool, creating a story around his life to fill in the pieces, to help us learn a little bit about our faith. There's the story of him coming to this town, and they were being besieged by this dragon. And St. George says, okay, let's make a deal. What I'm going to do is I'm going to slay this dragon. The only thing that you have to do is all be baptized. Pretty smart on St. George's part, isn't it? And thus, he baptized all those people and slayed the dragon. What a beautiful thing. But in reality, what does this fable teach us? That through baptism, the actual dragon, our actual enemy, is slain. And who is that? But the devil. Through baptism, the devil is slain. The devil is conquered. Now, oftentimes, you also see St. George with the cross on his shield. Why? Because the cross is our true defense against the devil, against the dragon who comes for us. Do we ever think about that? Do we ever think about the power of the sign of the cross that we make every day, before every prayer, after every prayer? If you're like me, we tend to take it for granted sometimes. I know oftentimes, you're just kind of not even half thinking. You're like, what was that? Make a real sign of the cross. When we invoke the power of the cross, the greatest sign of God's love for us, we truly are defended from the evils of the devil. And so the story of St. George teaches us of the power of the cross in our lives, which is a great reminder of God's love. And that whenever we're afraid, whenever we're scared, we should just make the sign of the cross and be strengthened by it. Sure, you're like, well, that's all well and good. There's all these nice stories about St. George, but who was St. George? Like the real St. George? Did he even exist? Of course he did. The real St. George lived about 303 AD. He was a member of the Roman army during the Emperor Diocletian. And Diocletian was one of the not-so-great emperors that mistreated his people. And he called upon George, one of the great soldiers of his army, to put aside his Christian faith and make homage to the pagan gods, to reject his faith. And St. George says, no, I'm not going to have it. And Diocletian really did not want to lose St. George because St. George was one of his great soldiers. And so he said, come on, I'm going to give you all these worldly things, all these awesome things. Leave your God behind. St. George said, no, I refuse. I'm going to lay down my life for Jesus Christ. And that's exactly what he did. You see, while I used to joke that the only thing we know about St. George is that he slayed the dragon, and that probably didn't happen, in reality, he did slay the dragon, because through his death, he participated in the death of Jesus Christ, which slain the devil. The one thing we know about St. George, that we actually know, is that he died for Jesus Christ. And in the end, isn't that all that really matters? That St. George was willing to give his life for Jesus Christ. In a beautiful way, it gives us the opportunity to kind of fill in the gaps, as they've done in the past with fables and different things. My question for you is, how do you think St. George reached the point in his life where he could say yes completely to the Lord and give his life for him? How did he reach that point? I'm sure it wasn't easy. I'm sure when he was my age, even younger, I'm not sure how old he was when he was martyred. Another detail we don't know, but I'm sure in it, years before his martyrdom, he never would have thought that he would have the strength to give up his whole life for Jesus. He may have hoped, he may have dreamed that he would be able to do that, but he wouldn't have thought that he could really do it. He would have to trust in God. And so, slowly by slowly, day by day, he grew in virtue, he grew in prayer. He grew in his love for his neighbor and his love for his God. And little by little, he became holy and holier and holier. And his divided heart became totally for the Lord. Until at the very end, he did the unthinkable. He gave his life for Jesus Christ. That's the important thing. That's the important thing that we must all remember. You know, today we get so bogged down in all the details of people's lives. We want to know everything. You know, you read on Yahoo News, it's like Prince Harry and Princess Meghan or whatever are doing this and this and this. Like, who cares? We get bogged down in all the details that don't matter in the end. Thousands of years from now, nobody's going to know or care. The one thing we know about St. George is the only thing that matters. He gave his life for Jesus Christ, and he was deeply in love with him. The love that we have during our life is the only thing that really matters. All the other details are really not as important as we think they are in the moment. So rejoice in that. You know, today is a great day as a parish people of St. George to consider what makes us unique. You know, every parish has their particular charism, their contribution to the universal church, something that's special to them. We've been around for, I think, 127 years now. It's a great time for us to reflect. What do we have to offer to the church? What makes us unique? I've only been here for 2 years, so many of you are going to have a much better idea than I do. But I think, looking at our history, we are a church that is persistent, that never gives up, that rises to the occasion when needed, and is not discouraged. Just look at our history. Back in the 1880s, we built our very first church. It only lasted a few years, and then the storm destroyed it. But we did not give up. We built another church, and it was burned in the fire a couple of years later. And then we thought, well, maybe we'll salvage the lumber. And so we took that lumber over to St. Mary's in Higginsville, and then St. Mary's in Higginsville burnt down. It's like, seriously. And then we built a new church up north of here by Casey's, about right where Casey's is now. And we were at that church for several decades, until about the 50s or 60s. And then we built the parish hall, made that our church. And it was tight, and it was cramped, but it was our church. And then we just celebrated the 15-year dedication of this church building I'm in right now. The 5th church in our history. It is not easy to build a church. I know many of you still remember building this one. And we built 5. That is a people of dedication. That is a people who love God. And is it any surprise then that St. George is our patron? Because St. George taught us how to persevere. You know, in the beginning, when we were first founded, we had no name. And then as the Franciscans started taking care of us in the late 1800s, early 1900s, something like that, we took on the name St. Anthony of Padua. And I think St. Anthony still intercedes for us today. At least he helps me find a lot of things. And then in the 40s, you know, Odessa had that kind of downswing in population and then this huge rebirth. And then we decided to change our name to St. George. And you know what? We haven't had any fires since then that I remember. St. George slayed that dragon for us. And he's been a good defender of us ever since. And so I think in many ways, St. George is a great patron for us. Because we are a parish filled with love, filled with sacrifice, and ultimately dedicated to Jesus Christ. And so today, on the Solemnity of St. George, I wish you all a very happy solemnity, a blessed day, and may you be truly thankful to be a part of a parish named after so great a saint. We are so unique, and that is an awesome thing, to be named after St. George. So may God bless you, and have a great and holy day. St. George, pray for us.